part of this also is we want to capture these stories while all of us are still alive and we could share them. And so this is a natural. Of all of the cenafores, eating out, that we've done, we've never come across an author. And so, without further ado, I want to introduce the author, Sam Carlino. And he's going to talk a little bit about his book, what motivated him to do the book, and then he will entertain some questions. Okay, Sam, all yours.
Great, thank you so much, Ken. Did everyone enjoy their dinner tonight? Oh, that's great. How was the Italian sausage? Okay, so I'm going to start off with the Italian sausage because we would not be here if it wasn't for that particular recipe of that sausage that I grew up learning how to make down the street at Time Market. If I believe most of you are old enough to remember the Time Market down on Bascom and San Carlos Street, and you might hear me say I call Time Market, not Time Deli, because Time Deli was after 1977, and for me, it was Time Market. I found out about our family's history because of that Italian sausage. In 1985, I had a sausage stand that I had with my father. It was my first business venture at the San Jose Flea Market. I was 18 years old. My dad was smart enough to make me a partner in a business at 18 to keep me off the streets in high school from, I was a senior in high school, and he knew that on Friday nights, if I was making sausage and selling sausage on Saturday and Sunday, that I wasn't going to be out partying on Friday and Saturday nights. So I'd be too busy, too tired on Saturday and working on Fridays, and it worked. And it helped me be able to hone the skills to be able to own my own restaurant later down the road with him. But our family history is very interesting coming from Sicily. My grandmother's side came from Lucasicula. It's in the region of Agrigento, and they arrived in New Orleans in 1888. And my grandfather's side, the Carlino side, came to the United States in 1897. So our family's been in the United States, before the 20th century, but they didn't move to San Jose till 1932. Now there's a very interesting story about why they didn't get here till 1932 and how they ended up here in San Jose. In 1897, when my great-grandfather Vito Carlino arrived in New Orleans, he followed his friend Joe Reggio, which is my grandmother's father, so he's my great-grandfather, from New Orleans to outside Pueblo, Colorado. Now Pueblo, Colorado is the sister city to Lucasicula in the Agrigento region of Sicily. More people live in Pueblo from Lucasicula than is actually in Lucasicula. It's crazy. They all ended up in Pueblo. There was a lot of mining, it was a steel town, and there was a lot of work. And there was farms in the region. So in 1897, when they ended up from New Orleans to Pueblo, they were doing a lot of farming. And a couple of the brothers, the sons, were actually working for the Colorado Mine Company. And they were farming sugar beets. And in 1916, they passed a precursor to our Volstead Act in 1920, the 18th Amendment. 4 years earlier, Colorado outlawed alcohol, as the rest of the country followed suit 4 years later. But Colorado was 4 years ahead of the curve. So it turned these farmers into bootleggers. They basically took their sugar beets and they started distilling them into Sugar Moon. And that's how Colorado got a big head start on the rest of the country as far as Prohibition goes. So by 1920, when the rest of the country goes dry, there's about 4 or 5 states that in 1916 enacted their own form of Prohibition, and these states were the forefront, the leaders in organization of already having their product out, ready to go, and that's why my grandfather and his brothers were so successful from about 1922 to 1931. So they had about a 10-year run in which they were very successful as far as distribution and connections all the way back through Chicago to New York. But there's a whole darker side to the story that I discovered, because going back to the sausage, I didn't find out about this until 1985. And it was one day, I think it was a Sunday, and I'm out at the flea market selling Italian sausage, giving samples out to customers. And this gentleman, I assume probably in his mid-70s, comes up. This is 1985, so I'm assuming he's probably born around 1910. And I said, would you like to try a piece of Italian sausage? And he goes, yeah, sure. So I give him a piece of sausage, and he goes, oh my God, this is the best sausage I've had since Time Market. And I said, well, this is a Time Market recipe. And he goes, oh wow. I said, are you a Carlino? And I said, yeah. Who's your old man? I said, Sam. He goes, oh, Mika, I know all your uncles. And he starts going down the whole list of all my uncles. In fact, I go back to them to the Colorado days. I'm like, oh, wow. So I call my cousin out from the hey, Pat, come here. I said, this guy knew our grandfather. I didn't know anything about my grandfather. And he goes, oh, God, yeah, I remember all those guys. They were just kids. He goes, in fact, I remember the day your grandfather was killed. Killed? No, I'm sorry. I think you're mistaken. My grandfather died of pneumonia. When you're 18 years old and about a 75-year-old man's laughing at you, you know that you're wrong. He says, pneumonia, my ass. They shot him up. He died of lead poisoning. I'm like, okay. Yeah, I'm like, all right. And he says, and he goes, your grandfather was Colorado's biggest bootlegger. He owned that state. I'll never forget that when he said that to me. He owned that state. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I never heard anything about this from my dad or my uncles or anybody. So on my way home, I'm riding home with my dad in the car, and being real as vague as possible. So what year did you come out to California? It was 1932. I'm like, okay. And your mom, she died young, right? What year did she die? It was 1935. She worked at down at the packing plant there on Osiré, right? Oh yeah, that's where she was. How'd she die? She died of stomach cancer. I'm like, okay. 1935. And when your dad died? He died in 31. I'm like, okay. Back in Colorado? Yeah. I'm like, well, how did he die? He died of pneumonia. I loved and respected my dad so much that I wasn't going to let him know or challenge him or tell him that, I knew the truth, and I let it lie. Well, my cousin's not so bright. He went home, and the first thing he did is we're mafia, we're mafia. He's telling everybody, like my Uncle Pete is going nuts. Going, no, we're not mafia. Stop. But our grandfather was, and he was with his brothers, the Colorado's first crime family, true crime family, and it's an amazing story because I wrote the book because of all of the misnomers and lies that were being told on the internet and just this crazy stuff that was out there. And I wanted to set the record straight. I had all the photos, I had all the stories, I had all the backstories. And I had pieced together through 10 years of research, hard research, on a lot of details about this whole story, about what really happened with my grandfather. But the most amazing thing that happens in this whole story is my dad and his 5 brothers. These 6 boys came out as pretty much orphans by 1935. Their mother and father were both killed. My grandmother died of cancer. My grandfather was killed. by 1935, 6 boys in the middle of the Depression are raising themselves here in San Jose, in the middle of the Depression, all under 19 years old. And, you know, it was the fact that all 6 of these boys ended up with none of them having any kind of record, police record, or ever having any problems with the law or anything like that. It's just the most amazing thing to me. It's a testament to how well they raised themselves, and throughout whatever wrong things happened during the 10 or 12 years that my grandfather was involved with all this bootlegging back in Colorado, something was instilled in those boys that made them good, upstanding citizens. And that's really the true reason why I really wrote the book, because I wanted to set the record straight. I wanted to write the definitive book on how this whole story went about, and I think I achieved that. It's fascinating because this story is so deep and so complicated. I'm not sure if many of you have seen the movie Donnie Brasco, but it's a true story about how an FBI undercover agent infiltrated the Bonanno family back in New York back in 1976 all the way up to about 81, 82. And it was actually offered to be a member of a made man in the mafia. Well, we have Lawrence Baldessari, who predated that by over 40 years. We had an undercover agent, federal agent, prohibition agent, that was working undercover, infiltrated the Carlino family, and was reporting back to the district attorney of Colorado all the details of everything that was going on. And in the middle of all this, the police department and the mayor were actually part of the corruption of what was really going on. No surprise there, right? But it's amazing to see the kickbacks, the payoffs, and the corruption, where you see an undercover agent literally laying out everything that's about to happen, and the payoffs and everything are thwarting actions that could have stopped a lot of the things that occurred in the book, where you're going to read about. It's a true crime book. It's not a novel. It's not made up. I researched everything and made sure that I had backups for everything that I put in. I'm really proud of the work, because it did take 10 years to research and a couple years to write, but it's an actual amazing story to see, first of all, how my dad and his brothers were brought to San Jose in 1932 and ended up just turning around, and we're sitting here all together talking about it at this point right now. It's a testament to those boys. I wanted to thank you guys all for coming out. I would like to answer some questions. If any of you guys have any questions about the story or anything in general. Yes, sir.
What's the name of the book?
It's Colorado's Carlino Brothers, a bootlegging empire. Yeah. And like I said, that sausage is the key. the whole story. We would not know about it. And it's funny because it's one of our best-selling items here at the restaurant. And we still make it the same way that we did when I was a little boy. I started making that sausage when I was 8 years old. Yes, sir.
Why did the boys choose San Jose?
So that's a great question. So the question was, why did our family come to San Jose? So my great-grandfather, Joe Riggio, had moved from Colorado in 1921 to San Jose and bought property on Almaden Avenue. I think it's 801 and 803 Almaden. And he had a grocery store in the front. He had a poker parlor in the back. And up on top, he had a rented area, a rental on the top. And then he owned the house right next door. So that was my grandmother's father. And when the boys were fleeing, because if you read the book, the first chapter is called 24 Hours Notice. My grandmother's given 24 hours notice to leave Colorado alive with her boys. And they're fleeing, and they go to San Diego first, meet with our relatives down there, and then they come up to San Jose. So the San Jose connection is here because of Joe Reggio, who was my great-grandfather.
What's on the Allegan property now?
I think one of the houses still stands, and I think the other one is a vacant lot. She asked what's standing on the Almaden Avenue properties. It's funny because on my dad's dog tags for World War II, he fought in the Pacific, and I looked at the address, and the address is no longer on North 16th Street. It's actually Highway 280. So the house is gone. It got consumed in the early 60s by Highway 280. Yes, dear?
Why did you start this delicious restaurant?
I'm sorry, why did I what?
Why did you start this delicious restaurant?
Why did we start the restaurant? Oh, that's funny. Okay, so my dad had left Time Market, Time Deli by 1979, and my Uncle Joe bought him out, and he went to go work for his friend George Bum at the San Jose Flea Market. They were childhood friends from the 30s. And my dad was in charge of the 26 different restaurants that they had at the flea market. Meantime, I was, throughout the 80s, I was going to high school, graduated high school, worked at the flea market with the sausage stand. And in 1987, I started working as a butcher at Zanato's Market down the street. And my dad, about the same time, at the flea market was developing new restaurants for the flea market. One of the ideas he came up with was barbecue. So about 1990, the barbecue restaurants were doing so well at the flea market, he asked me if I would be interested in going into partnership with him on a restaurant. He knew, that he wanted me to own my own business like he had owned his. And it'd be better than if I was to just get a job somewhere and work for somebody else the rest of my life. So I was 22 at the time, and it took a couple years to find the right location, and we had looked around and we had found this location. We started off with basically 2 recipes, the baby back ribs and the chicken, and that was the foundation of the restaurant. And then of course we threw in the Italian sausage, the pepper steak sandwich, which I kind of borrowed and stole from Angelo's Pepper Steaks at the fair. Growing up as a kid out there, that was the greatest thing in the world. It was right next to Angelo's Pepper Steaks was my Uncle Pete's the Hero Sandwich stand, and my Uncle Pete's stand would get all the overflow from Angelo's because people didn't want to wait 20 minutes in line for pepper steak, and they'd end up at my Uncle's Hero Sandwich stand right next door, which was right next to the waffle ice cream guy. If you guys remember the fair back in the 70s, that was a great childhood memory of mine. So there's a number of recipes that we added, family recipes that we brought in, and that's kind of how we started the restaurant. Was my dad's affiliation at the flea market with starting the barbecues out there, which we weren't part of. It was the flea market's deal, and I left my job being a journeyman butcher down at Zanato's, and we opened up. We took this insurance office and turned it into a restaurant.
The apple pie is fabulous. Who makes the apple pie?
The apple pie, I get that question a lot. They're Chef Pierre pies. They're par baked, and we bake them off here. If we can make them better, I would, but we can't, so we don't.
Plain and simple.
Yes, sir, Ken.
Do you have any relatives or connections in New Orleans anymore?
They're Carlinos and Ragusos in New Orleans. The Ragusos are a prominent family back there, and we come from a couple different names of Sicilian lineage. The Maniscalcos and the Ragusos. The Reggio has actually been changed. That's the American version, not the American, but that is the name that was changed from my great-grandfather. So Joe Reggio, who came here originally, his real name was Giuseppe Mortellaro. and we were Mortellaros before they changed the name to Reggio. But he changed it shortly after he landed in New Orleans. And then that was 1888. By 1891, there was a lot of, if you remember, with Hennessy and all the upheaval, what was going on in New Orleans, and he decided it was getting a little too hot there for Sicilians, so he moved to Colorado. Any other questions? Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I can't hear.
What happened to art?
What happened to
Art.
Arthur?
I can't.
What happened to
What
Arthur?
happened to Arthur?
I'm sorry?
He said, what happened to
What
Arthur?
happened to Arthur?
Arthur.
Who's Arthur?
Who's Arthur? Who's Arthur?
I'm sorry, who's Arthur?
Who's Arthur?
Wasn't he one of the brothers?
No, so there was 6 brothers. The oldest was Vic, and then Joe, then Chuck, Steve, Sam, and then Pete. There wasn't an Arthur though.
What happened to Arthur?
Died.
He had a
Left in the
sword,
wind.
stuck it in a rock.
In the wind.
Peppy.
No.
Any other questions? Yes. What happened to Thai Market? Okay, so 1977 they changed it from a market to a deli. They thought that it would be less work. Instead of running a restaurant, instead of running a grocery store, but owning a restaurant and a deli. Restaurant work is the hardest work in the world, so it was a mistake. My dad did it for a couple of years, and he said, "This is about time for me to get out." And he left in '79. He had a nice offer from his friend to semi-retire and still enjoy time with me. And I really didn't see my dad till I was 12 years old. He worked 80 hours a week, 6 days a week. And it was just crazy. And that's one of the things that I vowed that I never would do with my children. And once my children were born, I made sure that, my business would sacrifice, but for my children. I wasn't going to let my children sacrifice for my business. So. Yes, sir.
Your Uncle Joe, didn't he run the Time Market right up until they sold it?
No, my Uncle Joe sold it in 1987. So in 1987, he sold out to the Justin family and to Brendan Cotapilli. And Brendan sold out in 96 to the Cotapilli. So, Brendan sold out to the Justin family in 96. So from 96 to about 2006 or 2007 was the Justin family that ran it. Carlino hasn't run Time Deli since 1987. 87 was the last year that my Uncle Joe was there. Yes, Ken?
What was your family's reaction to you writing the book? Since they hid the story, now it's out there.
So his question was, what was the family's reaction to, the writing of the book? It was actually wonderful. Everyone was really happy to find out the truth, and the real truth. Good, bad, and different. It's all in there. I don't hide anything. And that's what's so interesting about it, is that I didn't sugarcoat anything. My grandfather wasn't a good guy, and I don't know how my dad and his brothers turned out so good. Honestly, it's amazing. Because, and another thing, when I went back to Pueblo, Pueblo's such a close-knit community. The Sicilian heritage from that town of Lucasicula, they're all really tight. And I was really, really surprised at the welcome that I got from Pueblo. It was amazing to see the good response. I was really worried going back there. I'm like, am I going to overturn some stones here that they don't want overturned? And when I went back, I was surprised and really surprised with the warm welcome. Yes, sir. Yes.
Do you think your father and his brothers would have had any objections to the book? It's kind of hard to answer, I guess.
That's an interesting question. He asked if my uncles would have had objections. I probably think one brother might have, but I think overall, I think the way I wrote it and the way that it's laid out, it tells the truth, and I know they were trying to hide this from us. They really hid it from us for 50 years. The whole family had no idea this history and the gravity of how big this was. When you go and look at January of 1931 to September of 1931, there's 12 headlines. And I'm talking about full-blown Carlino headlines in the Denver Post. This is really big. This is a big, big thing. They kept it hidden for 50 years. Well, there's a thing that came along called the internet that couldn't hide it anymore. It's the world's biggest library. Information travels at faster than light. And all this information was getting out there. It was starting to become, available in history books, and it was being taught in colleges and schools, and then a lot of it was not true. And that's the part that got me so frustrated. I mean, there was some crazy stuff. There's a picture on the front of the book of my great uncle Sam, who was murdered in the kitchen. And that photo, I own that photo. I bought it off of eBay for $8 in 2009. Okay, that was used in the Denver Post. Photo of my great uncle laid out on the kitchen floor. This is what they put in the Post, Denver Post, in 1931. And I have the original photo with a stamp on the back from eBay. I bought it off eBay from Historic Images, and I was blown away. This is the kind of stuff that my uncles couldn't hide. They couldn't hide anymore. So the truth was out. I think to answer your question, I know my dad would have been proud of it because of just the way that I went about it and tackled it straightforward, and I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't play him up to be a hero or anything like that. I just remember my dad telling me he was really disappointed in his father that he didn't have insurance for the family, knowing that the kind of life that he was in, it was inevitable that he was going to be killed. But he didn't have life insurance. But he had a Duesenberg. Okay? I mean, really think about that for a minute. I mean, a Duesenberg is about $5,000 back in 1930. And that's more money than a house. He could afford a Duesenberg, but he couldn't afford to think about his family. And that's what bothered my dad most about his father, was that he didn't take care of the family in that sense. And that struck me, right there. And it just always made me think about taking care of my girls and making sure that their future is taken care of. Anybody else? Yes, dear.
Sam, have you traveled overseas with your girls?
I will be. Not yet. I'm going to get over back to Sicily. We have family there, and I've made some connections through a cousin in New York who owns property in the town that my grandfather was born in, and it'll be a much different experience going back to Sicily, knowing somebody and staying in someone's house instead of being just a tourist. And I'm looking forward to that. But we're going to do it in the next couple of years. Yeah, thank you. Ken, you had a question?
Yeah, I had one more. When you went back to Pueblo, you said everybody was welcoming, but some of the people there weren't so supportive of your father. So how did that all come together? I mean, it's history now, but how did you handle that?
For the most part, everyone let bygones be bygones, and I'll tell you an interesting story that happened when I was in Denver doing my book tour, and I was at the Denver Library, and this tall, gray-haired gentleman walks up to me, really nicely dressed, and he introduced himself as Chuck Dana, Well, when you read the book, the Danas are our tribal. It's Hatfields and McCoys. 12 different people are killed, 6 on each side in this war between 1922 and 1929 in Pueblo between the Carlinos and the Danas. And he introduces himself as Chuck Dana, and I got a little chill down my back. I went, oh boy. He goes, I'm Sam Dana's grandson. I'm like, oh shit, okay. And he goes, I'm really looking forward to reading your book. I'm a dentist here in Denver, outside Denver. I was raised as an orphan along with my brothers and sisters. You know, or my dad, I'm sorry, he wasn't. His father was raised as an orphan after their brothers were killed. And when you read the book, it literally is Hatfields and McCoys. So we exchanged information, and I had ascertained through all my research and talking with my dad, and I had gotten a lot of insight, and I'd known that we were related to the Danas through marriage, through the Piscopo sisters. And my Aunt Josie was a Piscopo, and Pete Dana married a Piscopo. And I thought that was the extent of our relationship with the Danas. I thought it was through marriage. Later that evening, when I was at my hotel room getting ready to head down to Pueblo the next day, I got an email from Chuck Dana because we had exchanged information. And he stated in his email, he says, do you recognize any of these names on this list? And it was from Ancestry.com, and it was a DNA test. And I looked down the list, and my cousin Susan was the #1 hit. She had submitted her DNA to Ancestry. He had submitted his DNA to Ancestry. We were 4th cousins with the Danas. It wasn't marriage. We were related to them, back to Sicily. We were totally connected to this family. It was amazing to see that this family, the infighting that was going on, and I try to explain the vendetta, the Sicilian vendetta that goes back centuries, and explain to the 20th century mind, or 21st century mind, we can't really comprehend this. My great-grandfather, Joe Reggio, was born in 1859. This is before the Civil War. I mean, they're back in Sicily, their way of thinking, their culture, and the way of dealing with things and handling things back then are completely different than what we even think about right now. And those are, it's hard for people to understand. You're kind of almost seeing it nowadays where they want to rewrite history or they want to change things. It's like, well, you can't change it. You can say it wasn't right, or whatever they were doing wasn't right, but you can't change it. And you know, it was really interesting to see that we were connected to this family, and we were infighting with them, and we were killing each other, and the whole time they were cousins. They were very, very close, and that's what really shocked me. Yes, dear. Yeah, her question, she's asking if the infighting was back to Sicily. According to my dad, there was bad blood going back to Sicily. It was carried over to the new country. When my great-uncle Sam married Josephine Piscopo and Pete Dana had married the other Piscopo sister, that's when things got inflamed. Then you throw in the fact that both of them were rival bootleggers with farms adjacent to each other, literally sharing a property line, and things got out of hand. And by 1922, the Danas had killed, which was basically the boss of Pueblo, which Pellegrino Scalia, and he was from Bergio, and he was very close with the Carlinos, and I didn't know how close until after I wrote the book. After I wrote the book, all this information started pouring into me from people that was sitting on stuff, and they keep asking, "Oh, can you write a second edition?" I said, "No, I wish I could. My publisher back in South Carolina, they don't they won't allow for a rewrite. So I can do like a separate little pamphlet, but what I do is I do talks like this, or I'm in the process of writing a few different of the items down that I've learned since all this came out. Hey,
Have you had any discussion with the Danas in San Jose?
I reached out to the lady that has the flower company, and So we're trying to find out. I'm in the process of working with her to find out if if they're part of that clan that came from Colorado. Yeah. So she said she had to talk to her great aunt or something like that who knew more about it. The lady was more or less my age, maybe a little bit older, so she didn't quite know. But his question was if the Dana family that lives in San Jose, if they're related to the Colorado Danas. And I know my dad and their family were friends with the Danas that were in San Jose, and they always spoke highly of them. So I know there was no bad blood at least in the San Jose section.
Well, actually, there's another Dana segment, Doc Dana.
Okay.
Besides Marie Maxwell, the flower shop.
We have to find out where they're connected to. If you check in the book, there's 4 different Dana brothers, and they might be related as offspring from, because it's really sad, because I think about 18 kids ended up getting orphaned out of this whole big mess. I don't want to ruin any of the suspense if it's in the book, but all the Dana brothers die, and all the Carlino brothers die too. So there's 4 Carlino brothers that are all murdered, and 4 Dana brothers that are all murdered. So it's bloody, it's gruesome, and it really happened. It's some crazy stuff.
Life.
Thank you. I want to thank you guys all for coming out tonight. You're so wonderful. Thank you, Ken, for putting this on. I hope you guys enjoyed your meal, and it's just been a real treat to be able to talk to you guys and share this family history with you.
And they can get the book here.
Yeah, I'll be available to sign any books that you guys want to get, and we'll make a special price for you guys too. So, all right, just see me after. Thank you.
And I just want to make a plug. Now, everybody's oral history will not necessarily be this dramatic, but it's still dramatic. Everybody's history is. And, like I said, most of our restaurateurs don't have a book. So I want to thank you, Sam, for being so generous and this very special.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for thinking about it.
How are we going to do this, Dave?